Hey guys, tonight we're diving into shocking secrets about the Dahomey Amazon warriors you won't learn in school and more. And no, it's not cute. It's weird, it's wild, and you probably wouldn't last 10 minutes without crying or getting fined in barley. Picture this. You're standing on a battlefield, sweat and blood mixing in the air like some ancient war smoothie. The ground beneath you smells like wet dirt and the heavy stench of, let's say, not-so-fresh warrior hygiene. The sound of war drums fills the air as the clash of metal rings through your ears. And suddenly, a woman on horseback comes charging at you, wielding a spear like she's been practicing since age 5. Which, spoiler alert, she has. You blink and it's all over. Oh, and by the way, she's probably not even wearing shoes. Tough luck, right? So let's get into it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, go ahead and post where you're watching from and at what local time, because I'm dying to know who's pretending to work while watching this. Bonus points if you're watching while pretending to work. We've all been there. Now grab snacks, mute your mom, and let's get weird together. Now, the first thing to understand about the Dahomey Amazon warriors is that they were not your average, hey, look at me, I'm strong and I can fight kind of warriors. Nah, they were savage in the way that would make even your most hardcore military generals question their life choices. Seriously, if you think the whole Amazon warrior thing is just some cute Marvel concept, think again. These women weren't wielding shields in sparkly armor. They were riding into battle with real weapons, and they didn't need anyone's permission to do it. Nope, the Dahomey Amazon warriors were basically the real-life origin story of that badass woman who kills 10 dudes in one move and then makes a meme about it later. But here's the catch. They didn't just fight for fun. They fought for survival, power, and total domination. Their battle tactics? They were so vicious that even your worst middle school fight, where you shoved a kid into the lockers, would seem like a light-hearted game of Monopoly by comparison. These women didn't mess around. They weren't in it for fun battles or casual sword fights. No, the Dahomey Amazon warriors fought to maintain their power in a kingdom that had already survived endless wars and struggles. They had to be the fiercest warriors on the planet because anything less was a ticket to being slaughtered by their enemies. And they weren't about to let that happen. Let's discuss how they were trained and ever tried to wake up at 4 a.m. for a workout, only to quit after 5 minutes because your body refuses to participate in your delusions of fitness? Yeah, well, the Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't stop, ever. These women were trained from childhood to be ruthless. We're talking blood, sweat, and tears. Not the metaphorical kind, but the real deal. Training meant running, sword fighting, archery, and let's not forget the most essential skill, killing, and they didn't need any cutesy pep talks to make them tough. They were molded into warriors by a culture that knew how to do one thing really well: fight. They fought through pain, exhaustion, and fear. No excuses. It wasn't just about learning how to swing a sword and hope for the best. It was about pure survival. And if you didn't cut it, well, goodbye, warrior dreams. The Dahomey warriors didn't have time for weakness. Survival of the fittest? That was their motto. Your sandals would stick to goat pea floors, but you'd better keep up or get left behind. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, but that sounds a bit extreme. Yeah, they thought so too. They didn't just fight battles. They took on entire armies. But don't be fooled by the romanticized version of warrior princesses that we've all seen in movies. In reality, these women had to overcome serious obstacles. They lived in a brutal time. Enemies surrounded the kingdom of Dahomey, and every single one of them wanted to either destroy or conquer the kingdom. The Dahomey Amazon warriors were the last line of defense, and they knew it. So they trained harder than anyone else. Period. Let's talk about their fashion, shall we? I'm not talking about some standard leather armor like your favorite medieval knight in shining armor. Oh no, these women had their own warrior couture. They didn't go into battle looking like some disorganized ragtag group of pirates. These women had style. And by style, I mean thick, rugged cowhide skirts designed to protect them during battle. Forget about the perfectly tailored leather suit that makes you look like you're about to go horseback riding at a resort. These skirts were functional. They had to be, because in the middle of a fight, looking cute is the last thing on your mind. They weren't there to pose, they were there to fight. The cowhide skirts acted as a type of armor. And believe me, no one was stepping up to the plate after seeing one of these warriors in action. Now shields. You'd think shields would be boring, right? Wrong. The shields the Dahomey Amazons used were enormous. Like, bigger than your face, I'm not dealing with your crap kind of shields. These shields weren't some flimsy little boards that fell apart with one hit. Oh no, these were heavy-duty, combat-ready shields. And that meant when the Dahomey Amazons rode into battle, they weren't just surviving, they were dominating. A giant shield, a massive spear, and no fear. Forget your weekly grocery run. That's the kind of power you were dealing with. These warriors weren't just skilled with their weapons. They were experts at wielding them in every possible situation, and running at full speed while wielding a spear and shield? Check. Ducking and dodging arrows? Done. These women didn't just learn how to fight. They knew how to win over and over again. Historians still argue about whether they were entirely a female-only fighting force. I mean, seriously, that's still a thing people debate? Wasn't the fact that women were out there fighting enough proof? But let's not pretend there weren't some men mixed in. Maybe. But honestly, when you look at how the Dahomey Amazons rolled, you almost have to wonder if the men even stood a chance. It wasn't about gender. It was about brutality. So, yeah, there may have been men in their ranks, but who really stood out? It was the women, the ones who wielded power like they were born with it. And let's be honest, we're not out here questioning the validity of their existence. We're asking how many weapons we can fit into our Amazon cart at 2 a.m. Bottom line? The Dahomey Amazon warriors weren't just historical footnotes. They were warriors, rulers, and legends, warrior queens who didn't need any man telling them how to fight or what to wear. They made their own rules. And to anyone who dared cross them, they had a straightforward message. Bring it on. So you thought warrior queens were all about pretty crowns, right? Ha! If you've ever pictured a bunch of dainty women in sparkling dresses with flowery crowns riding horses into battle, you clearly haven't met the Dahomey Amazon warriors. These women didn't just break the mold. They crushed it with their spears. And trust me, their royalty wasn't about sitting on velvet thrones sipping tea. Nope, these women were out there making kings quake in their boots. These were the types of women who didn't just tell you to be the change you want to see in the world. They showed you blade first. Let's talk about their training. You know that one gym buddy who tells you to train like an athlete and then hands you a dumbbell that you can't even lift? Well, the Dahomey Amazons didn't have time for that. If you couldn't carry your own weight, you were left in the dust. The training was brutal, like wake up at 5 a.m. to run 10 miles while holding a spear brutal. And I'm not talking about some cute jogging with your dog training session. No, we're talking about sprinting through dense forests, dodging arrows, and learning how to fight with weapons so sharp they'd make your kitchen knives look like toys. All while your body is aching, your skin is covered in sweat, and you can't even remember the last time you ate a snack that didn't taste like war and dirt. But let's be clear, this wasn't just about fighting skills. It was about survival. The Dahomey Amazon warriors had a mentality so strong that it made motivational speakers look like they were giving TED Talks in kindergarten. Their entire existence was a fight to survive, and they knew it. They were groomed from childhood for battle. And when you grow up knowing that one wrong move could lead to your demise, you don't waste time on little details like socializing or gossiping about that one warrior who keeps accidentally falling off her horse. These women were on a mission to defend their kingdom, and they did it with ferocity and precision that would make your average army shudder. Historians still argue whether the Dahomey Amazon warriors were as widespread and organized as some say. Some claim they were an elite group of warriors, chosen and groomed from a young age. Others suggest they weren't as structured and might have just been a group of particularly vicious women who took on the task of defending the kingdom when no one else would. Either way, elite or not, the bottom line is that these women owned their roles. They were warriors and they ruled. And the men who saw them on the battlefield, well, let's say they were lucky to make it out alive. You know, it wasn't just about learning how to swing a sword like a badass. These women were trained in the art of psychological warfare, too. Imagine the dread that must have gripped their enemies as they saw a line of fierce women on horseback riding toward them, spears in hand, with no intention of negotiating peace. The enemy was probably thinking, wait, this is supposed to be the part of the battle where the men do the fighting, right? But that's precisely the point. This wasn't about gender. This was about power. The Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't ask for permission to fight. They took permission. And if anyone was going to stop them, they had to be prepared to face their fury head-on. Now let's talk about that whole riding into battle on horseback thing. Sure, the idea of riding into a battle with a spear might sound cool, but imagine doing it with zero chill. You're trying to maintain control of a horse, while also being 100% ready to spear someone in the chest. And if you thought horseback riding was all about fun trail rides and Instagram photos, think again. These women were riding into battle at full gallop, with enemies who probably had more experience than the horses they were riding. But the Dahomey Amazon warriors were built differently. They didn't just ride horses, they commanded them. This wasn't some cute galloping through fields kind of thing. This was a full-on charge in crush 'em and get out situation. And let's not forget the visual of it all. You've probably heard the saying, don't judge a book by its cover, right? Well, when the Dahomey Amazons came into battle, they didn't just come in. They entered. Imagine a whole line of fierce women, each one armed to the teeth, all riding in with the kind of posture that said, "You're about to regret everything." Their horses weren't some gentle beasts. No, they were warriors too. These were horses that understood the assignment, running at full speed without a hint of hesitation. And you better believe these women weren't the type to get distracted by a pretty view. They were focused, driven, and deadly. To watch them in action was to watch a well-oiled machine of destruction. A beautiful, terrifying, unstoppable force. Historians still debate whether these warriors had the same level of organization as an army or whether they were more akin to a tribal militia. Still, whatever they were effective. Whether they had a strict code of conduct or operated like a band of rogue warriors doesn't change the fact that they left an indelible mark on history. They didn't just fight. They owned every battlefield they touched. And sure, some people might want to pretend that these women were fighting by accident or for self-defense. But we all know the truth. These women were the epitome of badassery. Unstoppable, fearless, and ready for anything. It's funny, really. You've probably heard the modern-day women's empowerment slogans. But let's face it, those don't hold a candle to what the Dahomey Amazons were doing. These women didn't need girl power slogans. They needed spears, shields, and the courage to face their fears. Forget the hashtag. Forget the cute motivational quotes. The Dahomey Amazon warriors let their actions speak for themselves. You think your 9 a.m. meeting is tough? Imagine riding into battle with one of these women by your side. Yeah, good luck with that. So here's the deal. Whether you're on horseback with a spear or just trying to get through your day without exploding in a fiery mess, there's one thing we can all learn from the Dahomey Amazons. Don't back down and never, ever let anyone tell you that you can't take charge. Okay, so let's paint the picture. You're a kid in the kingdom of Dahomey. Instead of being stuck playing video games or scrolling TikTok, you're out here learning how to defend your entire kingdom with a spear. Not a plastic sword or a Nerf gun, nope, we're talking real weapons. You think you're done when you've finally mastered the art of throwing knives? Wrong. The Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't just train to fight. They trained to end things, swiftly and efficiently, like someone who'd never heard of too much drama. They didn't just talk the talk. They walked the walk. These women walked the walk, straight into history, leaving a trail of awe, terror, and a lot of blood in their wake. Let's start with the basics. The warriors had to learn how to use a wide range of weapons. Spears, swords, and axes were a given. But this wasn't just about slashing and hacking your way through enemies. The Dahomey Amazons needed to master their weapons, becoming extensions of themselves. I'm talking about that level of practice that makes the average person quit after 10 minutes. You know, the one where you arrive at the gym and struggle even to lift your water bottle, so you give up and go home? Yeah, no. These women were out here throwing spears with precision in every situation imaginable. You don't just pick up a weapon like a spear and get good at it. These women were constantly practicing their skills, day in and day out, until their hands were fused with their weapons. If you think that sounds intense, congratulations, you're absolutely right. Intensity is an understatement when it comes to this level of training. Now, I know what you're thinking, okay, but what about hand-to-hand combat? Surely they didn't just rely on spears. Oh, trust me, they had that covered too. You know how people say, you gotta work smarter? Not harder? Well, the Dahomey Amazons didn't have time for that. They were all about working smarter and harder, especially when it came to close-quarters combat. Imagine having to fight off an opponent who is bigger and stronger than you, and you don't have a weapon. What do? Well, you learn to use every part of your body as a weapon. Hands, legs, knees, elbows, you name it. These women could probably put you into a chokehold before you even had time to think about throwing a punch. And no, it wasn't just about taking down the weak. It was about taking down anyone at any time. One wrong move and boom, you're face first in the dirt. Historians still debate whether the Dahomey Amazon warriors adhered to a formal martial arts system or whether they adapted techniques from various fighting styles as needed. Some say they perfected their style with help from neighboring tribes. Others claim they were entirely self-taught. Either way, the results speak for themselves. These women weren't just out there doing half-baked moves. They were out here winning battles with style and skill that could have put any modern-day fighter to shame. The only difference is that they weren't getting Instagram likes for their moves. They were getting victories. And you'd think they'd be a little bit tired from all the fighting, right? However, these women were never exhausted. Or at least, they didn't have the luxury of showing it. There's no room for "I'm too tired" when you're fighting in one of the most brutal, blood-soaked environments in history. You know that morning when you hit snooze on your alarm and the thought of doing anything makes you want to collapse back into your bed? Now imagine trying to survive that for hours, days, months. Fighting and winning. That's the type of stamina and focus we're talking about here. And you have to wonder, what did they wear while they did all this? Oh, they didn't need any fancy gym gear. They fought in cowhide skirts. Yeah, you heard that right. Cowhide. Don't even think about complaining the next time you're trying to move in a stiff pair of jeans. The Dahomey Amazons weren't just moving, they were charging. Their skirts weren't for fashion. They were for protection and mobility. The cowhide was rigid enough to keep them safe while fighting, but flexible enough to allow the Amazons to move at lightning speed. And yes, those skirts were heavier than anything you'd wear to a modern-day picnic. But do they look stylish while wielding a weapon like they're about to take your head off? Absolutely. But let's talk about the real fun stuff, the battle tactics. You know those movies where you see 100 people running toward each other, screaming like maniacs, and then all hell breaks loose? Yeah, the Dahomey Amazon warriors had their own version of that. But it wasn't just about running and screaming and hoping for the best. Oh no. These women knew exactly how to strategize. Every move, every action was meticulously planned, because war wasn't just about raw strength, it was about using your mind. They'd launch attacks from unexpected angles, using the terrain to their advantage. These weren't random acts of violence. This was a calculated war machine in action. They'd strike hard and fast, then retreat into the trees or the forest, disappearing before their enemies had any chance to regroup. It was as if they had an entire set of moves that no one had seen before. Every single battle felt like a chess match, only with real blood on the board. Historians still debate the exact origins of their military techniques. Some argue that foreign methods influenced them, while others suggest that they were entirely homegrown. But honestly, who cares? The point is, they worked, and no one could touch them. The Dahomey Amazon warriors weren't just efficient, they were masters of their craft. They weren't afraid to experiment with new tactics and techniques. And they didn't wait for some blessing from a general or a king to do it. If something didn't work, they tweaked it. They figured out how to make it work, because survival wasn't a hobby. It was their life. If there was one thing that could have made them even more terrifying, it was their commitment to getting better. They didn't just train, they evolved. And that's the kind of warrior mindset you don't mess with. Okay. Time to dive into one of the most bizarre parts of Dahomey's warrior culture. The king's requirements. Spoiler alert. If you thought the ancient world was all about grand, poetic gestures and royal ceremonies, you're in for a rude awakening. The king of Dahomey didn't just want a few skilled warriors. No, he wanted the ultimate warriors. And how did he do that? Well, he set some wildly specific rules that, if you think about them for more than 5 seconds, will make your entire life seem pretty chill by comparison. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into some of the most absurdly intense royal requirements for the Dahomey Amazon warriors. First, let's talk about the selection process. You didn't just waltz into the elite Amazon Warriors Club because you could throw a spear without accidentally hitting your own foot. Oh no, you had to prove yourself. And how did you do that? Well, for one, you had to survive the most grueling trials known to humanity. We're talking physical endurance, brutal tests of strength, and the worst kind of psychological conditioning. If you thought surviving a 9-to-5 job was tough, try making it through one of the initiation trials for the Dahomey Amazons. These were not your cute little get-through-an-obstacle course kind of trials. No, these were trials designed to test your limits. Do you have what it takes to survive the most horrifying scenarios? Could you endure pain, exhaustion, and outright fear without crumbling? Because if you couldn't, you were out, and no one was holding your hand while you cried about it. Historians continue to debate the exact nature of these trials. Some claim they involved everything from hand-to-hand combat to surviving extreme conditions. Others argue that there were psychological tests designed to make sure these women were as mentally strong as they were physically. Honestly, no one really knows the full extent of the trials, and that's what makes it all the more terrifying. All we know is that if you survived and got chosen, you didn't just earn your place among the Dahomey Amazon warriors. You earned your right to be called a warrior queen. But don't get it twisted. Being chosen wasn't some you get a crown and a cake kind of deal. No, you were baptized into battle. But wait, let's not forget the more unusual aspects. The king didn't just need a bunch of tough women, he required women who were, well, untouched by men. Yeah, you heard that right. The king was really into the idea of keeping his elite warriors virgins. Why? Well, because the king believed that a woman who hadn't had any, shall we say, distractions was better equipped for battle. So, yeah, part of the training was dedicated to ensuring that these women stayed pure, at least in the eyes of the king. And if they did have relations with men, well, the consequences were severe. It's not like they were handed a slap on the wrist. No, they could face punishment or worse, banishment. So, it's not just physical prowess you had to worry about, you had to keep your royal integrity intact. Basically, the king was out here playing judge, executioner, and virginity counselor all at once. And, oh yeah, if a woman were found guilty of breaking the rules, she might end up sacrificing her life in battle to redeem herself. But let's not pretend that wasn't part of the allure for some. And you think your work meetings are intense? Try being an Amazon warrior who has to toe the line between absolute power and total control from a king who has more rules than your grandmother's backyard garden. The pressure was on, and the price of failure wasn't just humiliation. It was the possibility of becoming a sacrifice. But here's the thing, if you made it through the trials and stuck to the rules, you got to be part of the most feared military force in Africa. You didn't just serve the king. You were the king's weapon. You were the person other kingdoms were scared to face in battle, because you had been trained in ways that made you more powerful than any male soldier. But, of course, it wasn't all just serious training. The Dahomey Amazon warriors had rituals and ceremonies that were downright strange, even by ancient standards. For example, you didn't just get into battle and start slashing away. Oh no, before battle, some sacred rites and blessings were supposed to ensure victory. These rituals weren't some cutesy, let's burn some sage and hope for the best thing. They involved animal sacrifices, dances, and blood oaths, all in preparation for the ensuing chaos. But here's the kicker. These rituals weren't optional. You had to follow the exact procedures, or risk angering the gods and losing your chance at victory. Imagine that one wrong move and you're basically toast. Or worse, your enemies might find out your ritual was incomplete, and they'd know exactly where to strike first. Historians still argue whether the human sacrifices, part of these pre-battle rituals, were truly as frequent and widespread as some claim. Some scholars believe the reports are exaggerated. After all, who wants to be remembered for having a ritual sacrifice on the books? However, others argue that it was customary for the Dahomey Amazons to sacrifice someone to honor the gods before every battle. Either way, the point remains. This wasn't a culture for the faint of heart. There was no "let's hope we don't mess this up" mentality. There was only one thing to do, the ritual and go to war. This was a kingdom that thrived on intensity. And what's even crazier, these Amazon warriors didn't just want to be warriors. They wanted to be legends. They knew they were in a fight to the death, and they were prepared for that every single time. The king may have set the stage with his oddly specific rules, but the warriors, they were the ones who owned the battle. And if you weren't ready for that level of commitment and intensity, well, the door was right there. These women didn't have time to waste on weakness. Either you had what it took or you didn't. Alright, so you've survived the brutal initiation trials, kept your purity intact, and you're officially part of the Dahomey Amazon warriors. Great, right? Well, here's the thing, just because you're in doesn't mean you're free to do whatever you want. This isn't some warrior's paradise, where you can sit back, relax, and flex your abs for the camera. No, this is Dahomey, where rules were the most sacred thing, and breaking them, well, let's say the consequences weren't cute. Think of it like the ancient equivalent of being sent to Supermax prison, except you'd be left defenseless and probably forced to fight off entire armies. So yeah, no pressure. Let's dive into one of the most intense aspects of Amazon life: the consequences of breaking the rules. If you thought your teacher gave you a hard time for being late to class, imagine being caught in a serious rule violation while part of the Dahomey Amazon warriors. We're talking about stuff so serious that you wouldn't even want to whisper about it near a campfire. A major infraction could result in severe consequences, including execution. Yeah, you read that right. Get caught sneaking around with a man? Banishment or worse. Because remember, these women weren't just warriors. They were symbols of power and respect. And when you're a symbol, you better be sure to follow every damn rule or risk becoming a pariah. And trust me, being cast out of the tribe was basically a death sentence. You didn't survive on your own out there. Not unless you were a rogue warrior, and even then, the odds were stacked against you. One of the worst offenses? Breaking the strict rule of sexual purity. You might be wondering, but why was this such a big deal? Well, let's say the king's obsession with the warrior's virginity wasn't about morality or personal freedom. It was about maintaining their ferocity. The belief was that a virgin warrior was more focused, more intense in battle, and less distracted by earthly things, such as love or romance. This wasn't some king just trying to play dictator. It was about keeping his army of women on top of their game. But if any warrior broke this sacred rule, oh, the punishment was swift and brutal. Historians still argue whether the punishment was always execution or if there were less violent options like banishment or ritual disgrace. Some say that it varies depending on the situation, but who's kidding whom? Banishment was basically like handing a death sentence to a warrior who depended on the kingdom for survival. It wasn't just about being kicked out. It was about being forgotten, disgraced. It was the equivalent of taking someone who just won Miss Universe and saying, "Forget you ever existed." Which, let's be honest, sounds like one of the worst fates imaginable in a society where being forgotten meant you were nothing. Now, imagine living in a world where one mistake could be your last. Every single decision and every single action had to be calculated. There was no room for oops moments. The warriors didn't have time to think about their mistakes. They had to correct them fast or face the consequences. Can you even imagine that kind of pressure? Your every breath could be your last, especially if you were caught doing something you weren't supposed to. The stakes were higher than the highest mountains, and the punishments were harsh enough to make you reconsider even breathing too loudly. But the worst part? There wasn't always a clear line between right and wrong. The warriors lived in a world full of blurry lines. Who decided whether an infraction was big enough to result in execution? How would you even know what was a punishable offense? Sure, there were rules, but they weren't always clear-cut, and the consequences weren't always black and white. This was a game where everyone played by unwritten rules, and one slip-up could result in being cast aside or worse, destroyed. Imagine living in that world, always watching your back, constantly second-guessing yourself. Every moment was a risk. Every choice was a gamble. And if you lost, well, your life was over. The fact that so many women survived in that environment speaks volumes about their discipline, their focus, and their will to fight. If you made it out, you were a legend. If you didn't, well, no one would remember your name. And it wasn't just the rules you had to follow. It was the fact that these warriors were constantly fighting, against themselves, against each other, and against the constant threat of death. There was no time to sit back and relax. You didn't get to wake up, sip a cup of coffee, and scroll through your phone. You woke up with a purpose. Your purpose was to survive, to stay strong, and to make sure no one dared challenge your place in the kingdom. So, next time you think you've had a tough day, think about the Dahomey Amazon warriors who lived under constant pressure, knowing that one wrong move could lead to their ultimate demise. If that doesn't make you rethink complaining about your Wi-Fi not working, then I don't know what will. These women lived their lives on the edge, and their strength, discipline, and fearlessness became part of what made them immortal. If they broke the rules, they paid the price. If they didn't, they ruled the battlefield. Historians still argue whether the enforcement of these strict rules truly made them the perfect fighting force. Was their absolute discipline the key to their success, or was it the sheer intensity of the warriors' drive? Either way, one thing is clear. In the kingdom of Dahomey, breaking the rules was more than just a misstep. It was a path to ruin. Okay, let's get into the fundamental fun part, the weaponry and battle tactics of the Dahomey Amazon warriors. These weren't the kind of warriors you could pardon with a simple wave of a flag. Nope, these women came into battle fully armed, packing gear that could kill you faster than you could say, "That's it, I'm done." If you think your sword collection is impressive, wait until you hear about these weapons. The Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't just fight with any ordinary tools. They fought with weapons designed to destroy. There was no room for soft, shiny, display-only gear here. This wasn't your cute little cosplay collection. These weapons were meant for blood, and they didn't take prisoners. Let's start with the basics. Spears. You think you know what a spear is? Think again. These were long, heavy spears, designed to be thrown with deadly accuracy. You're thinking, okay, sure, throw a spear and call it a day. But these weren't your average toss it and hope for the best spears. These bad boys were sharp enough to pierce armor and stab through enemies with ease. And if you think you could dodge one, guess what? You'd be wrong. These warriors didn't miss. The Dahomey Amazon warriors had the kind of precision that would make even your sharpest shot look like you were trying to throw a rock at a moving target from 50 yards away. Now, let's talk about the big guns, the axes. These weren't cute little hand axes for chopping wood. These were massive, brutal killing tools meant to crack skulls and smash bones. Imagine standing face to face with a woman carrying one of these. And if you're thinking, I could probably handle that, let me just stop you right there. These axes weren't just for show. They were meant to be wielded with force, with speed, and with deadly precision. These women didn't hesitate. They didn't second-guess their moves. Every swing of the axe was an execution. There was no time for fancy flourishes or making it look pretty like you see in action movies. The Dahomey Amazons went for the kill every single time, and their weapons made sure they didn't miss. Historians continue to debate whether these axes were primarily used for ceremonial purposes or for actual combat. Some claim that the axes were a symbol of their status within the army, a means to strike fear into their enemies. Others argue that they were used in battle just as much as spears. Either way, the intimidation factor was a genuine concern. These weapons weren't just for cutting through flesh, they were for cutting through the very idea of mercy. Now, for those of you thinking, they must have just fought with blades and axes, right? You'd be wrong. These women weren't one-trick warriors. They had options. They had bows. And let me tell you, these weren't your run-of-the-mill shoot a couple arrows in the air and hope you hit something kind of bows. These were longbows designed for long-range destruction. You think you can dodge an arrow? Nope. Not when these women are shooting with the kind of precision that would make Legolas blush. And these weren't just any arrows, they were tipped with poison. So, even if you managed to survive getting hit, good luck trying to find a cure for that poison before you bled out. The real kicker? The Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't just rely on their weapons. Oh no, they devised a comprehensive battlefield strategy that made entire armies tremble in fear. If you've seen movies where soldiers charge in unthinkingly like a pack of angry dogs, you'll know that's a great way to lose. Fast. But not these women. These warriors were masters of strategy. They would charge in, create chaos, and then disappear. They could vanish into the trees, striking fear into their enemies with their ambush tactics. You've probably heard the term hit and run. But these warriors took it to a whole new level. Their skill wasn't just in the fighting. It was in the tactics. They would strike swiftly and without warning, then disappear into the forest, only to emerge again when their enemies were least expecting it. Imagine you're on a battlefield, and suddenly you hear a war cry from behind you. You turn around and bam, a spear hits you, and before you even know what happened, they're gone and gone before you can even scream, leaving you wondering if it was all just a nightmare. That's the type of warrior the Dahomey Amazons were. The kind that could get in and get out before you even knew they were there. And the whole disappearing act was a big part of their strategy. They would make multiple strikes during the battle, hitting the enemy hard and fast, then retreating into the trees or hills, blending in with their surroundings. Their enemies had no idea where the next attack was coming from. They could have been anywhere. The Dahomey Amazon warriors had mastered the art of surprise and psychological warfare. But their skill wasn't limited to just attacking. Oh no, they were also masters of defense. They knew how to use their environment to their advantage, whether it was hiding in the dense forests or retreating to high ground where they could fire down on their enemies. They were a masterclass in turning the battlefield into their own playground. It wasn't just about how many warriors you had. It was about how you used the terrain, how you used timing, and how you used fear to manipulate your enemies. Historians still debate whether the Dahomey Amazon warriors' battle tactics were more about ambushes and guerrilla warfare, or whether they practiced traditional, full-scale confrontations with their enemies. But if we're being honest, it doesn't matter which way you slice it, these warriors won every time. They were unpredictable, brutal, and had the kind of battle skills that made even the best generals break out in cold sweats. So, the next time you think about picking up a sword or a bow, remember, the Dahomey Amazon warriors weren't just throwing spears or waving axes around like a bunch of cosplaying amateurs. They were training to dominate, to kill, to win. And their weapons weren't just for protection. They were symbols of their unstoppable power. So, good luck thinking you could take them on with your real combat gear. Let's be real. You'd be lucky to make it 5 minutes in their world. Alright, now we're diving into the really creepy part of the Dahomey Amazon warriors' world. Their rituals. Forget the clean, cute, socially acceptable ceremonies that you might have in your family. This was the real deal. We're talking about rituals that made your skin crawl in a way that probably doesn't involve fuzzy blankets or a warm cup of tea. And when I say creepy, I don't mean in a spooky ghost story way. No, I mean terrifying, grotesque, and surreal rituals that would make your most hardcore conspiracy theories look like bedtime stories. Let's start with the basics. The Dahomey Amazon warriors weren't just trained in the art of war. They were also trained in the dark, twisted ways of ritual magic. You might be wondering, magic? Wait, what? Oh yeah, these women didn't just wake up, sharpen their weapons, and head to battle. Nope, they had to appease the gods first. But not in the burn a little incense and cross your fingers kind of way. Oh no, these rituals were wild. We're talking about animal sacrifices, blood oaths, and strange ceremonies that combined war with the occult. They didn't just pray for victory, they earned it by pledging themselves to the gods with actual blood and, yes, a little bit of human sacrifice. Think you're having a rough week? Imagine participating in a ritual where the only way to cleanse yourself was by spilling someone else's blood. One of the creepiest aspects of their rituals was the use of animal sacrifice. To the Dahomey Amazons, these sacrifices were essential to their spiritual and physical strength. Before heading into battle, warriors would perform a ritual that involved offering animals, often goats, chickens, or occasionally human captives, as sacrifices to the gods. These sacrifices weren't done haphazardly, either. Every single move was carefully planned, and everything down to the bloodletting had to be done in exact accordance with tradition. The idea was simple. The gods demanded a price for favor. If you wanted their protection in battle, you had to pay with blood. The warriors believed that without these sacrifices, they would never achieve the necessary strength to win. But let's be clear, this wasn't just a let's grab a goat and call it a day situation. No, these rituals were elaborate. They involved chants, dances, and even special outfits designed to bring the warrior into a state of spiritual clarity. You think you're a good dancer when you've had a few drinks? Imagine performing a sacred dance in front of a crowd of armed warriors, with blood still fresh on the altar. Oh, and did I mention that the Dahomey Amazons didn't just perform rituals for victory? Oh no, they also had rituals designed to keep them strong, rituals that involved ensuring that their bodies remained untainted and pure. Every warrior knew that if they broke their sacred code, the gods would not be pleased. And you didn't want to mess with the gods when your life depended on their favor. Historians continue to debate the extent to which these rituals actually influenced the warriors' behavior during battle. Some argue that the rituals were primarily intended to create a psychological advantage, making the warriors feel as though they had a divine right to victory. Others claim that the spiritual practices were just as essential as their physical training. But honestly, whether it was psychological or actual divine intervention, there's no denying that these rituals were freaking effective. The warriors didn't just charge into battle like a bunch of reckless teenagers. No, they went into battle with the belief that the gods were on their side. And when you believe you have the power of ancient spirits and divine favor, well, the confidence alone can send you charging into battle like a freight train. Now, let's talk about the human sacrifices. I know you're thinking, wait, what? Human sacrifices? Yep, you read that right. The Dahomey Amazon warriors had rituals where they offered humans to the gods. These weren't always enemy captives either. Sometimes it was members of the community. And it wasn't just a quick, let's kill them and get it over with kind of deal. The human sacrifice rituals were meticulously planned, with each part of the sacrifice being carried out ceremonially. The idea was that the person being sacrificed was honored by being chosen, but let's be honest, no one was excited to be that person. It was a grim, terrifying honor to be selected for the ritual, and the outcome was always the same: death. It was brutal and horrific, serving as a way to prove to the gods that the warriors were serious about their commitment to victory. Imagine standing there as the drums begin to sound, the warriors surrounding you chanting in unison, preparing for what was about to unfold. The atmosphere would have been so thick with anticipation and dread that even the bravest of souls would have felt their hearts race. But this wasn't just about fear, it was about power. These women wanted the gods to know they were serious. If they had to spill blood to show that seriousness, they'd do it without hesitation. The blood spilt in those rituals wasn't just for the gods, it was for the warriors themselves. It was a reminder of what they had committed to. It was a reminder that no one, not even death, could stand in the way of their power. Historians continue to debate whether these sacrifices were performed regularly or only in times of extreme crisis. Some suggest that human sacrifices were mainly reserved for essential battles or the coronation of new leaders. Others claim that it was more of a daily ritual, used to ensure the warrior's strength before each battle. Either way, the effect was the same. The Dahomey Amazon warriors lived in a world where life and death weren't just concepts. They were part of their daily existence. They didn't just fight for survival. They fought to appease the gods. And if you're willing to spill blood to honor those gods, you'll find that your spirit becomes invincible. And that's precisely what these warriors believed. The rituals weren't just about preparing for battle. They were about preparing for life, a life where death could come at any time. The Dahomey Amazon warriors were never caught off guard by the brutality of war. They embraced it, they thrived in it, and every ritual was just another step towards strength, the kind of strength that made them feared across the African continent. Alright, so by now, you've learned that the Dahomey Amazon warriors weren't just warriors. They were like an ancient weaponry catalog that could send even the most formidable enemies running for the hills. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just spears, swords, and axes. Oh no, that would be too predictable. The Dahomey Amazons were the original multi-tool survivalists. They didn't just show up on the battlefield with a few weapons and call it a day. No, these women had options, and when it came to warfare, they were ready to throw every single thing they had at their enemies. Picture a full-on arsenal of chaos that made even the gods take notice. We're talking about a lineup of weapons and tactics that would have given even the most seasoned warriors nightmares. Forget the basic soldier who has one sword and a shield. The Dahomey Amazons were the epitome of overkill, and they knew how to make it work. Let's start with the swords. You know how every medieval movie has that one shiny, gleaming sword that looks like it's been plucked straight out of an elven king's fantasy bedroom? Well, the Dahomey Amazons weren't interested in that kind of showy sword. No, their swords were designed for brutal efficiency. These weren't just weapons, they were tools for execution. They were heavy, sturdy, and designed to cut through armor like butter. If you think you can block a blow from one of these blades, think again. These swords weren't about looking pretty, they were about slicing through flesh and cutting down enemies with one swift strike. There was no room for fancy tricks or dramatic sword-fighting moves. It was just raw power, straight to the point. But wait, there's more. The Dahomey Amazons didn't just carry around your elemental, run-of-the-mill swords. Oh no, they also had machetes. Now, before you go thinking that machetes are just for clearing the jungle, let me stop you right there. These machetes were sharp enough to slice through bone, muscle, and anything else that stood in the way. You think a machete is just a small tool to cut down trees? Not in the hands of a Dahomey Amazon. These women knew how to use every single tool at their disposal, and their machetes were no exception. You couldn't just dodge a machete swipe from one of these women. No, you were either going to get sliced open or you were going to end up on the receiving end of a fatal blow. It wasn't if you got hit, it was when. Now, don't get all comfy thinking these warriors were only about the big, bulky weapons. These women were versatile. They were the Swiss Army knives of war, and no battlefield tactic was too small for them. You know those little, underestimated weapons that can totally ruin your day? Yeah, they had those too. Blow darts. These tiny little projectiles may seem like something from an over-the-top action movie, but let me tell you, they were deadly. Imagine being in the midst of battle, your senses heightened, and suddenly feeling a sharp sting in your neck. You turn around to see the Amazon that just darted you with a poison-tipped blow dart. And before you even know what's happening, your vision is going blurry. And it's not even the worst thing that could happen. You might think you're fine, but poison doesn't care if you think you're tough. Oh, and good luck trying to fight when your body is slowly going numb. Historians still debate the frequency with which the Dahomey Amazons used blow darts in battle. Some claim they were a secret weapon used in close combat, while others argue that they were merely a backup when all else failed. But one thing's for sure, they had them. And if you've ever seen one of those little devices in action, you know that it doesn't matter how many battle tactics you've learned. If you're hit, you're done. There's no way you're pulling a Tom Cruise and dodging a dart. You're out. But wait, there's even more. If you think they stopped at just poison darts and giant machetes, you're sorely mistaken. These women were skilled in mind games. That's right, they didn't just come to battle with their weapons. They came with their heads in the game and a plan for every situation. It wasn't just about attacking head-on or waiting for the enemy to make the first move. These warriors knew how to turn the tables at any given moment, using the terrain to their advantage. Ever seen a battle where it's all about guerrilla warfare? That's precisely how the Dahomey Amazons fought. They didn't just charge at enemies like a wild stampede. They used their surroundings, hidden in the forest, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when they did, you can be assured that every move was calculated. Imagine this, you're part of a massive, organized army, and you've got the best strategies. But you're facing an enemy that disappears into the trees and attacks you from behind without warning. You've got no idea where they're coming from, and every single attack feels like it's coming from a different direction. That was the reality of facing the Dahomey Amazons. Chaos. They weren't just weapons, they were the embodiment of tactical nightmares. If you're an enemy and you don't even know where the attack is coming from, how can you possibly defend against it? The Amazons didn't just fight. They confused, disoriented, and disrupted their enemies, breaking any sense of unity or strategic advantage the enemy might have had. Historians still argue whether the Dahomey Amazons actually employed these tactics with the kind of precision some describe. Some believe it was a psychological, primarily a warfare tactic, an intimidation tactic that made their enemies second-guess themselves. Others think that they employed guerrilla tactics and ambushes to such an extent that the very concept of a battlefront became meaningless. But whatever the case, one thing is clear. The Dahomey Amazons weren't here to play. They came, they attacked, and they left you questioning how on earth you ended up defeated. Their weapons weren't just physical, they were psychological, and they knew how to use that power to their advantage. These women didn't just show up to battle. They came with a plan, and a deadly arsenal of weapons to make sure that plan worked. Whether it was poison darts, giant axes, or stealthy attacks in the dark, these warriors weren't just about brute strength. They were determined to use everything at their disposal to overwhelm and destroy their enemies. The only question was, how much chaos could their enemies take before they broke? Spoiler, it wasn't much. Now, let's get to the part where it all comes together, the Amazonian queen herself. You might have heard of some famous leaders in history, Alexander the Great, Cleopatra, or even Queen Elizabeth, but let me introduce you to the Dahomey Amazon warriors leader. She wasn't just a queen. She was the embodiment of terror, fear, and absolute authority. This wasn't some passive monarch sitting back and looking pretty in a throne room while her soldiers did the work. No, this was a woman who ruled in the most brutal sense of the word. The queen of the Dahomey Amazons was the type of leader who made men quake in their boots, even before she stepped into battle. Forget what you think you know about queens, this was a warrior at the top of her game, and no one could challenge her rule. First of all, let's talk about her reputation. The mere name of the queen was enough to send entire villages into hiding. If her enemies had even a whisper of her presence, they would immediately scatter. This queen didn't need to raise an army. Her name alone was enough to make people understand that any confrontation with her would be their last. Think of the most feared figures in modern-day history. Now imagine a woman who exuded that same level of fear, but with the bonus of spear-wielding warriors backing her up. Yeah, that's the level of power we're talking about here. This wasn't just any leader. This was someone who commanded absolute respect, and any shred of disobedience would lead to swift consequences. And let me tell you, this queen didn't just rule with force. She ruled with ruthlessness. To say she was harsh would be an understatement. You're talking about someone who didn't let sentimentality get in the way of strategy. If she had to make a tough call, she did it without hesitation. Loyalty was everything, but betrayal? Betrayal was punished in ways that would send chills down your spine. Imagine being one of her warriors, knowing that if you failed even once, if you didn't meet the unspoken standards of her rule, you could be exiled or worse. The queen didn't care about excuses. She didn't need excuses to remove someone who failed her kingdom. Her rule was absolute and failure was not an option. That was a ticket to ruin. You didn't get to come back from that. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite her ruthless nature, this queen was also admired. Her warriors followed her fervently, and for a good reason. She was a strategist of the highest order. Under her rule, the Dahomey Amazon warriors didn't just survive. They thrived. They expanded their power, territory, and influence. Her leadership brought them to a level of unmatched military might. And it wasn't just because she could wield a spear or lead a charge. She understood battle. She knew how to win, and she wasn't afraid to sacrifice whatever was necessary to achieve victory. The queen wasn't some ancient diva concerned with pleasantries. She cared about winning, and she made sure her warriors knew that. Historians still debate whether she held absolute control over the entire army or whether there were moments when her warriors acted independently with their own plans. Some say her leadership was more democratic, with decisions made by the group as a whole. Others claim she was a dictator in the truest sense of the word, with no room for debate. But what's certain is this: her fearless leadership was key to the Dahomey Amazon warriors' dominance. The queen wasn't just a figurehead. She was the driving force behind a war machine that terrified every kingdom in its path. And the Amazons knew it. They didn't just serve her. They worshipped her in a way that made their enemies seem weak by comparison. And it wasn't just about leading her warriors into battle. The queen also made sure her warriors were trained in ways that were nearly unimaginable for any other army. She demanded discipline, strength, and loyalty. If you couldn't handle that, you were out. If you didn't want it, too bad, because the queen didn't just create warriors. She sculpted them. It was as if she were chiseling the perfect weapon out of raw stone. She didn't have time for people who didn't meet her standards. And you better believe, if you weren't pulling your weight, you'd be weeded out real quick. There's a fascinating legend that says the queen had a personal ritual where she would participate in battle herself. Not from a throne or behind a wall of soldiers, but right there in the thick of it. Some say she would even lead the charge into battle, swinging her sword and spear with unmatched fury. The image of a queen, dressed in full battle regalia, charging into the fray with a battle cry that could shake the heavens. That was the kind of image that made her warriors believe nothing was impossible. With her at the helm, victory wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. You didn't even think about losing. Historians still argue whether the Queen's direct participation in battle was factual or just a myth. Some suggest that her role was more ceremonial. She led in spirit, not with a sword in hand. Others claim she was at the front lines, personally slaying enemies to prove that she was just as deadly as her warriors. Either way, it doesn't matter. What matters is that the fear she inspired was real. The devotion her warriors had was genuine. She didn't have to prove anything to anyone. She had already earned the title of queen through sheer strength, intelligence, and brutality, and her warriors knew precisely what she was capable of. The legend of the Amazonian queen still stands today, and for good reason. She didn't just lead an army, she led an empire. And even if myths and conjecture surround her story, one thing is sure. When it comes to warrior queens, she was the definition of fearlessness and ruthlessness. So, next time you think about being a leader, remember being feared isn't about throwing a tantrum or forcing people into submission. It's about commanding respect through action and proving that you're not just capable of being in charge, you're born to be in charge. The queen of the Dahomey Amazons didn't ask to be feared. She earned it every day through her strength, strategy, and iron will. So, you've seen these women ride into battle, armed to the teeth and feared by every empire they came across. You've watched as they sliced their way through history with axes, spears, and a ferocity that would make even the most legendary warriors break a sweat. But here's the million-dollar question. Where did they go? 1 minute, the Dahomey Amazon warriors are ruling the battlefield, instilling fear in every corner of West Africa, and the next, poof, they vanish like smoke in the wind. It's like a bad horror movie. All that build up, and then, when you think you're about to get the epic climax, the whole thing fades away. You'd think they'd keep winning battles forever, but that's not how history works. So, let's get to the shocking truth of how the Dahomey Amazons disappeared from the pages of history. First of all, let's not sugarcoat it. Their disappearance wasn't as glamorous as some might want you to believe. No, the fall of the Dahomey Amazons was ugly, tragic, and steeped in betrayal. These women didn't fade out of history because they lost a battle or because they were defeated in some noble last stand. It wasn't about their bravery. It was about the politics and shifting powers of the time. You see, the very thing that made the Dahomey Amazons so powerful, their fierce independence and warlike spirit, was also the thing that would eventually bring them down. As European colonial powers became increasingly entrenched in Africa, they began to crush the old kingdoms one by one, and who was in their way? The Dahomey Amazons. Their strength, their numbers, and their unrelenting resistance made them one of the last barriers to colonial control. But that's where things started to fall apart. These Amazons weren't just fighting other African kingdoms. They were fighting the European colonizers, who came with far superior weaponry, resources, and a willingness to do anything to get what they wanted. It wasn't long before the Dahomey Amazons, no matter how mighty, were no match for the guns, cannons, and modern tactics that the Europeans had brought with them. Historians still argue whether the colonial forces completely wiped out the Dahomey Amazons or whether they were absorbed into the new regime. Some claim the warriors fought until the very end, with their final stand being a massacre at the hands of French colonial soldiers. Others say that the warriors were eventually disbanded, as the Kingdom of Dahomey transitioned into a French colony, where the Amazons became a shadow of their former selves. Some suggest that as the French gained control, French-trained soldiers gradually replaced the warriors, and the old ways, those terrifyingly brutal rituals, the savage battles, and the fearless leadership of the Queen, were slowly erased from public memory. But it wasn't just colonialism that crushed the Dahomey Amazons. Oh no, there were internal struggles as well. As power shifted in Dahomey, alliances were broken, leaders turned against one another, and the once united kingdom began to fragment. By the time the French came knocking, the Dahomey Amazons weren't just fighting a foreign enemy, they were fighting their own divisions. And this internal fracture played a massive role in their downfall. Sure, they were tough, but even the fiercest warriors can't fight when their own kingdom is falling apart from within. Here's where it gets even darker. After the French defeated the Dahomey kingdom in the late 19th century, Many of the Amazon warriors were either captured or assimilated into the new colonial system. Some historians claim that the French even offered rewards for the capture of Amazon warriors, turning the whole thing into a grotesque game of cat and mouse. The once proud Amazons, whose very name sent shivers down the spines of enemies, were reduced to mere war trophies for the colonizers. Their fierce independence? Crushed. Their legacy? Discarded. And those women who survived? Many were forced to assimilate into the new colonial society, no longer the legendary warriors they once were, but just another group of people under French control. But what happened to the memory of the Dahomey Amazons? Surely, their fearsome legacy couldn't be erased so easily. It turns out that the French had a remarkably effective way of erasing inconvenient histories. The legacy of the Dahomey Amazons, once a symbol of strength, rebellion, and fear, was suppressed. The stories of their brutal training, fierce battles, and sacred rituals were lost. They were reduced to myths, legends, and fairy tales, stories that people told to amuse themselves but never took seriously. By the time the French finally left, the Amazons were nothing more than a footnote in history books. Historians still argue whether the French colonization was the primary reason for their disappearance, or whether internal political changes played a bigger role. Some claim the French deliberately sought to erase the warrior culture to weaken any resistance to their colonial rule. Others believe that the Amazons' disbandment was more due to internal corruption and betrayal within the kingdom itself. Either way, the result was the same. The Dahomey Amazons faded into obscurity, their once great empire collapsing under the weight of colonialism and internal decay. But here's the truth. Just because they were erased doesn't mean they were forgotten. The legends of the Dahomey Amazons still live on in the hearts of people today. Their bravery, strength, and resistance to overwhelming odds continue to inspire countless people, especially within the African diaspora. They may have been crushed, but their spirit, that can't be erased. As for the modern-day legacy, well, historians and activists continue to fight for recognition of the Dahomey Amazons. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in their story, thanks in part to movies, books, and documentaries that shed light on the truth behind their disappearance. Some scholars are even working to bring these forgotten warriors back into the spotlight, reminding us of all of the fierce women who fought to protect their land, their people, and their legacy. But don't kid yourself, no one can ever fully erase the Dahomey Amazons. Their legend, even if it's not widely taught in schools, will forever remain in the hearts of those who dare to uncover the truth. So where did they go? To put it bluntly, they didn't go anywhere. They're still here. Their stories live on, just waiting for the next generation to pick up the torch and bring their legacy back to life. So you've probably heard of the Dahomey Amazons? But here's the thing. There's a considerable debate about whether the Dahomey Amazons were truly an entirely female army, or if there were some dudes sneaking around in the mix. Some scholars say it was a 100% female operation. No ifs, ands, or buts. But others? Well, they like to poke holes in that theory, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there were a few male soldiers in the ranks. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't some cute, let's have a nice philosophical discussion kind of thing. This is about the truth. Was the Dahomey Amazon warrior force as pure as it's been made out to be? Or were there some men behind the curtain pulling strings and flexing muscles? Historians still debate whether the Dahomey Amazons were an all-female force or if they included any male warriors. Some historians love the idea that the Dahomey Amazons were the ultimate girl gang, a squad of tough, spear-wielding women with no need for men. They argue that there's plenty of evidence that shows that the Dahomey Amazons were female warriors, and that the women served as the kingdom's elite fighting force. After all, the name Amazon itself, taken from the mythological female warriors, suggests a totally female army, right? But here's where it gets a little murky. Some of the skeptics claim that the idea of an all-female army is more of a myth than a fact. They argue that while there were definitely female warriors in the Dahomey army, there may have been male soldiers as well, serving alongside their Amazonian counterparts. Why? Well, it turns out that the reality of war is more complex than just gender, and some historians think that a little bit of pragmatism was involved. A little bit of, let's win the war no matter what. with men possibly filling roles where women were simply unavailable or impractical. According to these scholars, it's possible that men were included in the army for specific logistical or strategic reasons. But the problem with this theory, it somewhat undermines the epic all-female warrior army narrative. And honestly, that narrative is too good to let go of without a fight. Now, here's where things get really fun. There's also an argument to be made that gender in the Dahomey army might not have mattered as much as we think. You see, the Dahomey Amazons were far more about skill, power, and ruthless efficiency than any rigid gender-based role. The fact that these women were feared regardless of their gender was the point. They were warriors first and foremost. To the people they fought against, it didn't matter whether the warriors were men or women. All they knew was that they were facing one of the most terrifying and skilled fighting forces in history. It wasn't a matter of who's in the army, as much as it was, how many people can we kill today? That's the reality of war. There's no time for debating gender when you're trying to kill your enemies before they kill you. Here's the fun part. Whether they were all women or a mix of both men and women, the Dahomey Amazons didn't just inspire fear, they redefined what it meant to be a soldier. The very idea that a group of women could step onto a battlefield and be as feared or more feared than any male army is a statement in itself. That's why this debate over whether the military was entirely female or not is kind of a distraction from the real truth. These women were absolute powerhouses, no matter how many dudes were in the background. They didn't just fight. They became symbols of strength, independence, and defiance. And that's why their legend still looms large today. Whether the ranks were comprised entirely of women or primarily women with a few men scattered among them, the Dahomey Amazons have earned their place in history as a symbol of female power and prowess. Historians continue to debate whether the Amazons were truly a gender-segregated army or part of a larger, more flexible military structure. Some believe that men were included in the fighting force but weren't given the same level of recognition as their female counterparts. You've got to admit, the idea of an Amazon warrior not being part of the elite fighting force is a bit weird, right? Would they have called it the Amazon Army if there were men involved? Probably not. So what's the deal with this whole gender debate? Here's a fun twist. Some historians actually think that the Dahomey Amazons were an exaggeration in the first place. There's a theory that when Europeans first encountered the Dahomey Amazons, they observed a group of women warriors and exaggerated the details, ultimately transforming the whole thing into a myth of an all-female army. The thing is, if you look at the actual accounts from the time, they're pretty clear that these women were badass. They didn't need to be entirely female to make the point. The real takeaway from the stories of the Dahomey Amazons is their power, regardless of their gender. So what's the final verdict? Are the Dahomey Amazons a true all-female force? Or is it more myth than reality? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. They were definitely an elite force, made up of some of the fiercest warriors ever to walk the earth. And yes, women were leading the charge, sometimes by the queen's side, sometimes alone. But were they entirely female 100% of the time? It's unlikely. Whether men served with them or not is less important than what these warriors represent. They represent the fact that, in battle, it's not about your gender. It's about your ability to fight, your ability to lead, and your ability to strike fear into the hearts of your enemies. The Dahomey Amazons did all that, and more. Historians still argue about whether they were an entirely female army or not. But who cares? The Dahomey Amazons were warriors, plain and simple, and that's the only thing that really matters in the end. By now, you're probably getting the picture that the Dahomey Amazon warriors were no ordinary fighting force. They were more than just a group of highly skilled women. They were an empire's defense, an unyielding line of resistance that made invaders second-guess whether they even wanted to show up. But here's the thing. As fierce as they were, their battles didn't always go in their favor, especially when European colonizers decided they were going to do what they do best: colonize. And oh boy, when the French showed up, it wasn't just an uneven battle. It was a massacre waiting to happen. The thing is, history often glamorizes the idea of the last stand, where the resistance fights valiantly until the very end. In reality, it wasn't just about power or skill. It was about resources, technology, and sheer military might. And guess what? The French had all of it. Now let's rewind a bit. For years, the Dahomey Amazons had been one of the fiercest military forces in West Africa, wreaking havoc on their enemies with their clever tactics and brutal strength. The French colonizers, however, didn't come to the table with axes, swords, and poisoned blow darts. Nope, they came with guns. And not just any guns. Guns that could cut through anything in their path, including the tight-knit warriors of Dahomey. You know what they say, it's hard to beat modern artillery with a spear and a dream. The French were able to use their superior firepower to dismantle the kingdom of Dahomey bit by bit. They didn't need to engage in the brutal face-to-face combat that the Amazons were used to. The French didn't need to be skilled in hand-to-hand combat. They just needed to pull a trigger and unleash a whole new level of destruction. But don't think for a second that the Dahomey Amazons went down without a fight. They were far from the sitting ducks that some people want to portray. Even as the French began to push in, the Amazons fought with the same ferocity they'd always had. They didn't just sit back and let themselves be wiped out. They made the French work for it. In fact, one of the most brutal battles occurred when the French launched a campaign to conquer the kingdom of Dahomey. The Amazons fought tooth and nail, using guerrilla tactics to launch surprise attacks on French soldiers. And when the French thought they had the upper hand, the Amazons would retreat into the jungle, disappear, and wait to strike again. It wasn't just a battle of guns versus spears. It was a battle of strategy versus firepower, and the Amazons were masters of the former. But here's the ugly reality. The French weren't stupid. They understood that fighting the Dahomey Amazons wasn't about winning on the battlefield alone. It was about outlasting them. The French had the luxury of time and resources, something the Dahomey Amazons couldn't match. It wasn't about who was tougher, who was stronger, or who had the better strategy. It was about attrition. The French could afford to lose soldiers. The Dahomey Amazons could not. Eventually, the French brought in more troops, more artillery, and more supplies, while the kingdom of Dahomey was being slowly suffocated by the sheer weight of a prolonged war they couldn't win. And even when the Amazons continued to fight valiantly, the French military machine was just too much to handle. Historians still argue whether the Dahomey Amazons could have prevailed if the French hadn't used their superior artillery to decimate them essentially. Some say that the Amazons had a chance, especially with their guerrilla tactics, but others contend that the colonizers were simply too well equipped and too determined. The fact is that the kingdom of Dahomey wasn't just fighting a foreign power, it was fighting a force of colonial conquest that had no problem waging a war of attrition. And when you're facing off against that kind of power, your spears and shields can only take you so far. The final blow came in 1894, when the French forces finally conquered the kingdom of Dahomey. The last great stand of the Dahomey Amazon warriors was one of the bloodiest, most tragic chapters in their history. Despite their unparalleled courage and strength, the Amazons couldn't keep up with the French military's firepower, and after a final defeat, the warriors were forced into submission. The French didn't just defeat the Amazons, they subjugated the entire kingdom of Dahomey, transforming it into a French colony. The Queen of Dahomey, along with many of the remaining warriors, was forced to submit to French rule, and with that, the Dahomey Amazons as a fighting force ceased to exist. But just because they were conquered doesn't mean they were forgotten. The legacy of the Dahomey Amazons endured, even if the weight of colonial history temporarily obscured it. The stories of these warriors, these fearless women who fought for their kingdom, for their families, and for each other, remained embedded in the culture. Despite being defeated, their reputation as the fiercest warriors of West Africa lived on in oral traditions and legends passed down through the generations. Historians continue to argue whether the defeat of the Dahomey Amazons was inevitable or if there was a way they could have overcome the French. Some believe the Amazons could have fought longer, but without the resources to sustain their resistance, it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Others point to the fact that while the French had the firepower, the Dahomey Amazons had a devotion to their cause that was second to none, and that could have potentially turned the tide. Ultimately, though, it was the larger forces at play, the politics, the technology, and the relentlessness of colonialism, that sealed the fate of the Dahomey Amazon warriors. Okay, by now, you've seen how fierce, deadly, and strategically genius the Dahomey Amazons were. But Let's be honest, what was it actually like to be one of these legendary warriors? Was it all just charging into battle with spears and axes, swinging them around like some warrior princess? Or was there more to it? Well, sit tight, because being a Dahomey Amazon wasn't as glamorous as the stories make it out to be. It was hard, and I'm talking brutal, grind till you drop hard. You think you know what tough is? Try training for war in one of the most dangerous times in history, with absolutely no room for weakness. Let's start with the basics. You didn't just become a Dahomey Amazon by signing up one day. Oh no, sweet summer child. Becoming a warrior was more like a lifestyle choice you didn't get to back out of after a bad day. If you were lucky enough to be selected, you were thrown into an intense training regimen from the time you were a kid. That's right, they didn't wait until you hit adulthood to start cranking up the intensity. Kids were raised with weapons in their hands and the constant reminder that survival meant never letting their guard down. This wasn't just about being strong in battle, it was about endurance, mental toughness, and relentless discipline. You woke up at the crack of dawn, trained till your body was screaming in agony, and then did it all over again the next day. If you thought the military boot camp was brutal, the Dahomey Amazons took it to a whole new level. Imagine not just running, but running while holding weapons, wearing armor, and learning how to fight instinctively. You didn't have time to cry about it. You just did it. Or else. And let's talk about the physical toll of this lifestyle. You didn't just train your muscles, you trained your spirit. When you're a Dahomey Amazon, giving up wasn't an option. And those injuries, well, you had to get used to them. There were no band-aids, no ibuprofen, and definitely no sympathy. If you broke your arm or twisted an ankle in training, you sucked it up, because tomorrow you were right back out there, wielding your spear like you were born with it in your hand. And the training wasn't all just about physical strength. The warriors were also drilled in strategy, psychology, and mental conditioning. You weren't just a weapon, you were a living, breathing war machine. Your mind had to be sharp enough to anticipate the enemy's next move while your body was doing things that should have been physically impossible. You learned how to think and react in the most chaotic, life-threatening situations. This wasn't some half-hearted game of pretend to fight with foam swords. This was real, and failure wasn't an option. The Amazon warriors were bred to be cold, calculating, and, above all, tough. But what about when they weren't on the battlefield? Was life just constant war? Well, yeah, kinda. But other moments made being an Amazon a unique experience. When you weren't training or getting ready for battle, you were living in a highly structured environment with strict rules. These weren't the kinds of women you could party with on weekends. This was a job. You woke up, you trained, you fought, and you followed the orders of the queen. Although there were celebrations and festivals, they were few and far between. When you're a member of a force like the Dahomey Amazons, your life is consumed by duty. And that meant no time for frivolous distractions. Relationships? Don't even think about it. One of the key rules of being an Amazon was that romantic relationships were strictly off-limits. You were a soldier, and your loyalty wasn't just to your country. It was to your comrades and to the kingdom of Dahomey. If you were caught breaking that rule, well, let's say you'd better start packing, because you weren't going to be part of the Amazon ranks for much longer. Now, let's talk about their relationship with death. If you think modern soldiers have it tough, think again. When you're training to be a warrior in a society that revolves around conflict, you have to face the fact that death is a constant companion. The Amazon warriors knew that each battle could be their last, but they didn't fear death. They embraced it. To them, death was just part of the journey. But it wasn't just about embracing death. It was about outsmarting it. The Amazons were trained always to survive, to make it out of every encounter, even if it meant leaving their comrades behind. They didn't fight to die. They fought to win. But they understood that, in their line of work, death was never far behind. And sometimes you couldn't outrun it. Historians continue to debate the psychological impact of this lifestyle. Some say the mental and emotional toll was just as intense as the physical one. A whole generation of women grew up learning how to fight and how to survive. But how did that affect their ability to function in society once the war was over? The sheer grit and toughness that were drilled into them on the battlefield didn't exactly translate into everyday life. They had learned to see the world as a place of constant battle, and once the fighting stopped, they had to figure out how to live without it. For some, this may have been a smooth transition. For others, it was likely a painful adjustment. But here's the kicker. When the battles were over, and when the last charge had been fought, the women of the Dahomey Amazons were still living in the collective memory of their people. They weren't just forgotten. No matter how much time passed, the legacy of the Dahomey Amazons, their incredible toughness, their warrior spirit, their unshakable belief in their cause, remained embedded in the culture. These women didn't just fight for a kingdom. They fought for an idea, a belief that women could be warriors, that they could lead, that they could stand toe-to-toe with the strongest men in the world. So, was it worth it? Well, if you ask the warriors who survived, they probably wouldn't hesitate to tell you yes. They didn't just live, they thrived. Their lives weren't easy, and their bodies and minds paid the price. But they became part of a legacy that would live forever, an idea that continues to inspire people around the world to this day. Being an Amazon wasn't for the faint of heart. It was a lifetime of sacrifice, strength, and survival. But the Dahomey Amazons didn't just survive, they defined what it meant to be a warrior. You're probably wondering, after everything we've covered, the fierce training, the battle tactics, the weapons, and the legend of the Dahomey Amazon warriors, how the hell did they get erased from history? After all, these women were an unstoppable force. They terrified entire armies and played a critical role in resisting colonial rule. So why, then, do so many people have no idea who they are? Well, welcome to the depressing reality of how history works, my friend. And, spoiler alert, it's not because they didn't deserve to be remembered. Let's start with the basic fact. The colonial powers, especially the French, had zero interest in keeping the legacy of the Dahomey Amazons alive. Imagine being a colonizer with a history of conquering other nations and then having to face off with a badass group of women who absolutely refused to back down. Yeah, I can see why they might want to erase that from the books. The French weren't just interested in taking over land. They were interested in taking over culture and rewriting history. When you're conquering people and forcing them to adopt your way of life, you don't want the locals to remember that time a bunch of women kicked your ass and made your soldiers run for their lives. So what did the French do? They erased the existence of the Dahomey Amazons from historical records. Boom, gone. Just like that. The official narrative shifted from fierce warrior women to mysterious myths and legendary figures, all to avoid reminding the colonized people of their glorious past. The Amazons were stripped of their importance in favor of manly heroes. After all, we can't have strong women becoming a symbol of resistance, can we? That might encourage more people to resist the colonizers. The powers that be weren't interested in celebrating women warriors. They wanted to crush that narrative entirely. But here's the thing, you can't just erase a legend. No matter how many history books you edit or how many myths you spread, people remember. And in the case of the Dahomey Amazons, people remembered. The stories of their bravery, strength, and tenacity didn't just disappear into thin air. They lived on in the folklore, the stories told by families, and even in the way the people of Dahomey, now Benin, still look back at their warriors with pride. Sure, the history books might have forgotten, but the people didn't. They kept the spirit of the Amazons alive, tucked away in their cultural memory. But what about the official history? Well, that's where things get murky. The Dahomey Amazons didn't just fade into obscurity because the colonizers wanted them forgotten. The rise of European imperialism and the narrative that only European men could be mighty warriors was so pervasive that even post-colonial leaders found it hard to celebrate such a non-Western and non-male model of strength. These women didn't fit into the tidy boxes of what a warrior should look like, so they got shoved out of the mainstream historical narrative. That's right, the very women who could have rewritten the way the world thought about gender roles, leadership, and combat were kept in the shadows because their very existence threatened the dominant narrative of who was allowed to be a hero. That's the frustrating reality of how history has often overlooked or underappreciated powerful women throughout the ages. But let's be clear, this erasure wasn't permanent. In recent years, historians, filmmakers, and activists have worked to bring the legacy of the Dahomey Amazons back into the light. It's not all gloom and doom. People have started to recognize these women for what they truly are, incredible warriors. The recent interest in these legendary figures has sparked a resurgence of conversation, particularly with films like The Woman King, 2022, which drew inspiration from their story. While the film took creative liberties, It reignited interest in the real warriors who inspired the narrative. Suddenly, people began asking questions like, wait, who were these women? And why hasn't anyone told their story before? And more importantly, they began to demand answers. So there's hope. Slowly but surely, the story of the Dahomey Amazons is making its way back into the public consciousness. Scholars are rewriting history, digging through forgotten archives, and finally telling the truth about these incredible women who defied the odds and fought for their land, their people, and their place in history. It's like the world's collective memory is starting to wake up from a long slumber. The women who were once erased from the books are now making their way into classrooms, documentaries, and the hearts of new generations. Historians still debate whether the erasure of the Dahomey Amazons was intentional or just the natural result of colonialism's widespread influence. Some argue that it was a deliberate attempt to suppress the idea of strong, independent women as leaders and warriors. Others claim that it was just a byproduct of colonialism's focus on male-dominated narratives. But regardless of the reason, one thing is clear: these women will not be forgotten. The truth about the Dahomey Amazons has always been there, waiting to be uncovered. And now that the world is finally paying attention, it's only a matter of time before their legacy is fully restored. The Amazons are no longer just myths or legends. They're symbols of the power of resistance, resilience, and the strength of women throughout history. So, the next time someone tells you women can't be warriors, point them to the Dahomey Amazons, and remind them that history has a funny way of remembering the women who once fought to rewrite it. So, you've made it this far, and now you're probably wondering, what can we actually learn from the Dahomey Amazon warriors today? What relevance do their brutal training regimens, their relentless battles, and their tragic erasure from history have in your life? Well, my friend, the answer might surprise you. Because while the Amazons didn't get the Instagram recognition they deserved, their story is packed with lessons that go way beyond the battlefield. Whether you're building a business, battling personal obstacles, or simply trying to navigate the challenges of modern life, the legacy of the Dahomey Amazons offers a treasure trove of wisdom that remains incredibly relevant today. Let's start with the obvious: resilience. You've probably had one of those days or weeks when everything goes wrong, right? Maybe your Wi-Fi dies right in the middle of a critical Zoom meeting, or you hit a roadblock in your personal or professional life, and suddenly, it feels like the universe is conspiring against you. Now, imagine that daily. That was the life of the Dahomey Amazon warriors. They faced wars, internal betrayals, and the constant threat of death. Yet, they survived. They didn't just survive, they thrived. Their ability to endure the harshest conditions, adapt to changing circumstances, and persevere regardless is something we can all learn from. These women didn't have the luxury of quitting. For them, failure wasn't an option, it was a death sentence. And that same mindset can help you power through the most challenging moments in your own life. Next time life throws you a curveball, channel your inner Amazon and remember that resilience is key. Don't stop fighting just because things get tough. Keep going. But it's not just about physical endurance or surviving hard times. The Dahomey Amazons were also masters of mental strength. Training in the Amazon Corps didn't just involve lifting weights and mastering the spear. It also involved learning to navigate the jungle. It was about discipline, the kind that kept them focused on their goal even when everything else in the world was falling apart. And that's something we all struggle with today, right? It's easy to get distracted by social media, the pressure of keeping up with everyone's highlight reel, or the endless stream of noise that surrounds us. But to truly succeed, whether in business or personal life, it's about focus. The Dahomey Amazons didn't have time for distractions. They had their eyes on the prize, to protect their kingdom, to fight for survival, and to ensure that their people remained safe. And that focus, it helped them become unstoppable. Take a lesson from these women and start prioritizing your goals. Whether it's growing your business, improving your health, or learning a new skill. If you focus your energy, you can accomplish anything. Now, let's talk about adaptability. The Amazons were not just skilled with traditional weapons. They knew how to adjust to changing conditions on the battlefield. Whether they were ambushing enemies in dense forests, fighting against the brutal forces of colonialism, or using guerrilla tactics to outsmart more technologically advanced opponents. The Dahomey Amazons knew how to adapt. They didn't adhere to a single method. Instead, they evolved, innovated, and stayed one step ahead of their enemies. In today's world, adaptability is more important than ever. The rapid pace of change, especially with technology and the global economy, means that if you're not constantly adapting, you're falling behind. So take a page out of the Amazon Warriors playbook. Learn how to pivot when necessary, find new ways to solve problems, and never let change paralyze you. The world is constantly evolving, and the Dahomey Amazons showed us how to adapt to change. Next up, we have leadership. The Dahomey Amazons weren't just a group of warriors. They were a community built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. Their queen didn't just tell them what to do. She led by example. She was there on the front lines, charging into battle with her warriors. She didn't sit back and let others do the dirty work. The Amazons followed her because they saw her strength and determination. And that's the kind of leadership we can all learn from today. Whether you're leading a team at work, taking charge of a project, or even managing your own personal goals, leadership isn't about barking orders, it's about leading by example. It's about showing up, doing the work, and earning the trust and respect of those around you. The Dahomey Amazons were able to accomplish the impossible because their leadership was rooted in action, not words. And if you want to be a true leader, that's the kind of mindset you need to adopt. Now, let's dive into loyalty, one of the core tenets of the Dahomey Amazons. These women didn't just fight for their own survival. They fought for each other. Their loyalty to their fellow warriors was unshakable. And in today's world, loyalty is more important than ever. Whether in business partnerships, friendships, or even romantic relationships, loyalty is the glue that holds everything together. The Dahomey Amazons knew that they were only as strong as the team around them. They fought together, lived together, and died together. Their strength wasn't just in their weapons, it was in their unity. In a world that often promotes individual success over teamwork, the Dahomey Amazons remind us that collaboration, trust, and mutual respect are the genuine keys to achieving greatness. Finally, let's talk about empowerment. The Dahomey Amazons didn't need anyone's permission to become warriors. They didn't wait for someone to tell them they were capable. They took their place in history by sheer willpower. And in a world where women continue to fight for equality, the story of the Dahomey Amazons serves as a reminder that women can be leaders, warriors, and trailblazers in every field. If the Amazons could break societal norms and carve out a space for themselves as legitimate warriors in a male-dominated world, imagine what we can do today. The story of the Dahomey Amazons is more than just a fascinating chapter in history. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that, regardless of the challenges we face, we all have the power to persevere, adapt, lead, and thrive. So, the next time you're facing an obstacle, whether it's in your personal life, your career, or just trying to get through a tough day, think of the Dahomey Amazons. Let their strength, resilience, and leadership guide you. Because if they could change the world, so can you.